Um, we are live. Nice. I like those glasses, Laura.
Thank you. I don't normally like to wear glasses, but the my eyes, I get hay fever. They're just like starting to really kill me. So I'm trying to get used to wearing glasses.
Yeah, my wife is really suffering from that. You know, the trees are, you know, in bloom, and she's
It
feeling.
normally get me, but for some reason this year it's just been like, you know, like I wake up and they're all like really puffy and painful.
Is that hay fever? No.
Are you in New York?
Here's Tom.
Okay. Yeah, up in Inwood.
Mm-hmm.
Not too far from you, right? You said you were in Riverdale, is that right?
Klitzner's in Queens.
In Queens, Forest Hills. Forest Hills.
Why did I think you were in Riverdale?
That's because Bob Kramer is in Riverdale.
And did you guys used to meet up in Riverdale at like a place where I feel like something was going on in Riverdale back in the day?
Well, that's how I met Robert Kramer. There used to be a poetry reading in Riverdale at the Irish place called On Bale Bach. And I was performing and I saw this young gentleman, Robert Kramer, in the corner. And I said, this is the most interesting guy in the room. And I said, hey, do you like Browning? He's like, I love Browning.
That's how it happens.
And Tom, he came at he met us. It was me and Robert Kramer at the New York City Poetry Festival. And he came up to the table visiting from Philadelphia. He's like, hey, what about this Browning guy? And I'm like, oh, Lord.
He'll be here shortly. Yeah.
But I would like to also say that we have scheduled so far, unless something happens, we will be at the New York City Browning Festival, or the New York City Browning Festival, the New York City Poetry Festival with a Browning table this year as well.
Great. Excellent. Yeah. Excellent.
Governor's Island. Yeah. Tom, how are you?
All things considered, pretty good. And I'm very much into all things Browning. And in fact, I'll take this opportunity to, I recently acquired 2 books. Browsing in the secondhand bookstores. 2 books, they're collections of critical essays about Browning. I found them in 2 different bookstores.
Who are they edited by? I feel like I recognize those.
Well, one is English. It's Writers and Their Background series from whenever the 1950s, edited by Isabel Armstrong.
Yeah, that's got some great essays in that one.
Yeah, very interesting, unique essays.
Really good.
And the other one, edited by Philip Drew, is called Robert Browning, A Collection of Critical Essays.
Yeah, I think I have those ones too. They're both really good.
Yeah, so I'm glad to be able to add these to my little
stack of books behind you.
My connection is unstable.
Well, if you look behind our speaker, Bob Griffiths, that, from what I understand, from what he told me, is all Browning books.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I keep wondering, New College said they would be interested because, you know, as I age, I think about where some of the stuff is going. And New College down here, which is a small liberal arts school, they're very good, they're very advanced. The students walk around barefoot a lot of time. You get the idea. You know, California in the 60s, 70s. And they said they'd be willing to take them. So sight unseen. So at least there's a place for them to go.
Beautiful.
It's nice to know. I know that my professor from the Graduate Center who I did my dissertation with has the most incredible collection of books I've ever seen. So many first editions, like just mostly Victorian novels. But she's already spoken to me many years ago. She said, Laura, these are coming to you. Just so you know, you're the first person who's getting the call. And I was like, I don't want to see her go anytime soon. Obviously, I can't imagine living without her, but her books, every time I go around there, I'm just like, oh, so many books. I don't know where I'm going to put them.
All right, so we got 8 people at 1:08. I like it. I think maybe we'll wait a couple more minutes, see if the stragglers are coming in. How are you, Herb? Everything well with you? You get a haircut?
Yeah. Yes, I did. Well, I'm going for a little longer stretches now, and my haircutter said it's easier that way. You can get more to get a hold of. But so he starts out cutting it fairly short, and it's nice. Summer's coming, and it's a nice style. So I'm doing a lot of writing for my book. It's picked up a lot, and I'm doing some stuff now that passes topic on the Enlightenment and the individual, and looking at backward to the Renaissance and forward to the present day, to discuss the conception of the individual in each of these ages. Anyway, it gives me the chance to read a lot of things I haven't read before, and Leibniz jumps out at me as somebody who has very similar ideas to some things that I'm thinking about, and it's nice when there's a 400-year difference between you, and it said this guy was thinking some things that cross my path in a nice way. You feel part of something. And I think I feel that way, with Browning when I read him.
Well, you're doing Leibniz. That's great, because he was a poet too. People don't realize that. In fact, he has a little nasty satirical poem of his that I translated and published a few years ago.
Ah.
He was such a brilliant guy, though. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing the span of his interest, and I didn't know it. He was a librarian for an educated library, and the cataloging.
Yeah. It was in Wolfenbüttel, wasn't it?
I forget the name of it. It had a long name, but I think it was a different long name, and.
Okay.
But all of the larger libraries around Germany started imitating his cataloging system,
mm-hmm.
and it was books were a kind of an image for him for representing the individual, and he imagined going into a book and then going into a line on the book, and then starting expanding the words. And you begin to see individual features, and he sees the individual kind of emerging from this, and the individual, he says, is infinitely deep and detailed, and that's what makes him unique. And that was an idea expressed in a different way in the Renaissance, that for the first time, that the individual is not only someone who was important to the society as being a separate individual, but that the person was unique and irreplaceable. That came in with the Renaissance. And so now the reason why all this is of interest to me is because I'm writing a book about the individual and future technology, personal technology, where we it'll be our partner or our instructor, or in some cases our manipulator. According to Harari, he says our manipulator is the most likely, and we have to guard against it. I think the way we do that is to understand ourselves better, instead of just leaving the whole job to an external agent.
Heady stuff.
Yes.
All right, so I think let's see, it's 1:12 p.m. Robert, are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right, so a man that doesn't really need much introduction. He served as president of the New York Browning Society for 2 stints, correct?
2 4-year terms, yeah.
2 4-year terms. And also as the corresponding secretary for how many years?
Oh, goodness gracious. 10.
And truth be told, some of Robert Griffith's newsletters were immaculate, and that torch has been passed down to Laura, and I think that the transition has been amazing.
She's great. You're great, Laura.
Big. The newsletter looks excellent, and Robert Griffith started that tradition. That tradition actually goes back quite far. The newsletters that I have been able to collect over the years go back all the way to the 40s. And it's just a rich tradition that I think at one point would also be just worthy of its own lecture, just the history of the newsletters and the society going from the Waldorf Astoria to this to there. I mean, the Browning Society has really done all it can to survive. And it's an amazing opportunity for all of us to be together in that. And I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank our speaker, Robert Griffiths, for being an amazing part of that history. And without further ado, we have our speaker, Robert Griffith, on why Browning?
Thank you, sir.
Question and ambiguities.
All right. I will give a bit of Browning history real fast. When I joined the Society in 1980 at the invitation of Don Pepper, Reverend Dr. Donald Pepper, who was president at the time and a personal friend, and trying to beef up the Browning Society, I said, sure, I like Browning. I didn't know that much about him. But in that first few meetings in 1980, there was a woman who came in. There were more eccentrics in the meeting then, and that was fine. But there was a woman who came in always in a fur coat, and she had a little tiny itty bitty toy dog in her pocket, and she had nothing on under her coat. This is a true story. Now, she never opened the coat in the room, but I was told by others that she always goes like that with the dog in the pocket and nothing on underneath. So see what you were missing. Anyway, and it's good to see you all. Herb, you and I are not getting any more wrinkles. That is really nice. And I do have hair. It's just cut very short right now. So this is a talk I gave years and years ago. But I wanted to touch quickly on just poetry before I get into Browning. And just, it's talking about why Browning would fill an entire semester, as we all know. So this will be in broad strokes with some dives into some specifics along the way. Poetry is, how do we say it? Rhyme and sing-song come as naturally to kids as eating. They enjoy it, they recite it, they make up their own, but then they go to school and they're taught, no, this is poetry. They're taught to look at it from a distance, memorize it, analyze it. And what they are taught is so often second rate. And I remember my experience in grammar and high school back in the 50s. Poetry is now, as we know, lower than ever in educational priorities, especially with young people and the competition from internet, cell phones, and the bane of the world, social media. So meaningful thought and discourse are discouraged. So why poetry? First, because it deals with the human condition in a unique and telling way. Second, because it can express greater truths through metaphor than prose can through literalism. For metaphor is often truer than literalism, which is certainly my view of scripture. We learned in school about metaphors, something that provides comparison without like or as, which we call simile. But the meaning, as some of you know, is rooted in Greek and is far more subtle. It combines the Greek meta, beyond, and for, to carry. So metaphor can carry us beyond the literal. The metaphor comments on the literal, but at a higher, more abstract level, and expresses truths we cannot intellectually get our arms around. The human condition, the spirit, the greater self, mysteries of the divine, of life, of the world around us, of good and evil, and so on. 3, Camille Paglia wrote, poetry envelops the imagination and focuses the soul. It forces us to slow down, which I think is very important these days. 4, because poetry, through its very artificiality and heightened language, goes deeper and with greater beauty than most prose. 5, because the most magnificent expressions, I think, of any language are to be found in its poetry. Shakespeare and Donne in English, Dante and Petrarch in Italian, Goethe and Rilke in German. And I'm a big Rilke fan, and Rilke liked Browning also, by the way. And finally, because only music and art can touch the heart and soul the way poetry does. We can storm the heavens with Beethoven and hold our breath at Vermeer's paintings and explore the endless permutations of human nature with Shakespeare and with Robert Browning. So criticism and analysis are helpful, but talk about poetry is secondary. Analyses of poetry engage the head, but not the heart. In art, an analysis of Monet's haystack paintings, for example, is fascinating and instructive, but it's not about the impasto. That's important. It's about how they speak to our soul. I once went to there's a museum in Hartford, and in the main dining room, it's somebody's house, I forget who it is. There's a Monet haystack painting at either end of the dining room, and you just stand there and go like this. They're wonderful. And the same with technical analysis of poetry. Okay, yeah, we get the bones, but we need the flesh and the spirit. I believe that poetry is really only understood and felt when it's experienced. It's not subjective, not objective. When we abandon ourselves to the subjective, we are transformed and enriched, I think. Emily Dickinson said, and I love this one, a poet can choose but few words, and they have to be the chiefest words, the best words. And finally, poetry is meant to be read aloud and slowly. The earliest ones we know, the Odyssey, the Iliad, the Psalms, were originally spoken and memorized and finally put down centuries after. St. Benedict talks about, in his Rule of Life, talks about listening with the ear of the heart. And that's what I try to do with poetry. So why are there Browning societies in the United States, the oldest of which, as we know, is the Boston Browning Society, founded in 1885 when Browning was still alive. And we were founded, and if you don't know the answer to this, you have to get out of the Browning Society, 1907. And I think the reason is because Browning really endures. Oscar Wilde called Browning the second Shakespeare, not because of the way his poems are written, but because of his subject matter. So here are some thoughts on why Browning still matters. And there will be some slides, PowerPoint as we go through this. Browning, like Shakespeare, is a surgeon of human character, as my fellow President Emeritus Steve Downey puts it. It's this very trait that separates him from his 19th century contemporaries. His preoccupation with the metaphysical and the abstract. And Laura, you gave a talk on this once back in 2009 somewhere, I think. Am I right?
Yes, yeah, I think it was about music. Was that the one about his view of music?
Yeah, there we are. But I remember that. His preoccupation with the metaphysical and abstract, human nature, human and divine love, good and evil, power and love and hate, all the paradoxes of the human condition. These issues are timeless, which is why Browning, I think, and Shakespeare remain so relevant today. Another thing that separates 19th century poets from Browning is the difference between what we can do with the others' poetry, sort of a passive receptivity. But it's hard to do that with Browning. It requires involvement. And yeah, it's an overbroad statement, but for example, most times we can listen to Keats and Wordsworth and Tennyson and get it, not so much with Shelley. And we can respond viscerally to those extraordinary gifts just on hearing it. Browning, however, as we know, is not easy to listen to always, nor is he an easy read. I want to deal first with this issue of obscurity, which he was criticized for in his own time and still is. So let me deal. Oh, I forgot my first slide. Oh no. Wait a minute. My friend, Mr. Keppel helped me with this. Here we go. I wanted to show this wonderful picture of Browning in his old age. I love that picture. It speaks so much. So sorry for having forgotten it. We will move on. It's not generally remembered today, but charges of obscurity were also leveled against Wordsworth and Keats and especially Shelley during their time. It's no longer so, with possible, as I said, of Shelley, but it remains against Browning. And it's unfair to generalize and then categorize Browning as a poet of obscurity. For like Browning, all poets should be judged on individual poems. Some are brilliant, some are great, some are inferior, most are accessible, but some are obscure. And I think the obscurity charge persists because so much of his work contains historical, biographical, theological, and mythological references that were not obscure in the 19th century to the educated reader, but they sure are to so many these days. And Browning didn't set out to write obscure poetry. Any obscurity manifested itself as an organic part of his writing process. So, three elements to Browning's obscurity. First, obscure syntax. The way he uses words is not what our brains and ears expect. So we do a mental double take, which can distract us from the message. And he, of course, was the first modern poet as recognized as such by T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. Two, very obscure historical, mythological, theological, and biographical references, which we'll come to soon. And finally, obscure message. He has more than one thing to say. And there's no easy summary. There's not always an easily wrapped up point. The great Dutch scholar and philosopher Desiderius Erasmus wrote about the power to be found in ambiguity, and I think Browning was a master of it. So let's get the, wait a minute. Let's get this obscurity charge out of the way as we go to the young Browning.
What a handsome man, what a handsome man.
A handsome man. And the poem, of course, is Sordello, written when he was 28 years old. It's hugely and overly ambitious and flawed, and indeed is very obscure in parts. But what's Browning doing? He's attempting to work out the issues that occupied him for the rest of his life. As he put it, the development of a soul. Sordello was an Italian poet born in 1189 who later moved to Provence. Browning had read Dante's account of Sordello in the Purgatorio section of the Divine Comedy and in other books, and the only person probably I've ever known who read all 34 of Sordello's extant poems. Browning typically used the historical character and known facts of Sordello and his era as the kernel of the story, but fictionalized it to establish larger truths. For example, the historical Sordello supposedly died at 90. Browning has him die tragically at 40, his promise unfulfilled. As for the development of a soul, Sordello is in conflict with ambition and love on the one side, and the artist and the soldier on the other side. The poet Sordello must also incite men to warfare if the cause of justice is to prevail. These are just a few of the conflicts and dilemmas Browning deals with in the in this work. So here we go. I'm going to give you the first stanza of Sordello, and then I'll go back and explain it, or at least some of the terms he uses. Sordello, written in 1840. Who will may hear Sordello's story told, his story. Who believes me shall behold the man pursue his fortunes to the end, like me. For as the friendless people's friend spied from his hilltop once, despite the din and dust of multitudes, and Tapolin named of the naked arm, I single out Sordello, compassed murkily about, with ravage of 6 long, sad 100 years. That's the first stanza. Okay, as some of you know, the friendless people's friends was Don Quixote with his friend Sancho Panza. And he is spying from his hilltop, going back to Don Quixote now, Pentapolin, who was really a shepherd leading a flock of sheep. But Don Quixote made him into this commander who always went into battle with his right arm bare. So just that stuff, and the army, of course, was the flock of sheep. So this is just to get through the first stanza, but to start putting some perspective in this poem, where he's going with it. And you can see why the critics were all over him like a cheap suit. Who is this young dude? What's he doing? That's ridiculous. Of course, they were all used to Keats and others. So I want to jump from that into the dramatic monologues. We were talking earlier, a few of us, about Browning's role as a dramatist. He wrote many plays, and I actually did a stage reading of one down at the Episcopal Actors Guild years and years ago. And he had great skills, but there was no dramatic interest in the characters. They were expressing views of Browning's rather than engaging the viewer in their life and their relationships. So the dramatic monologues, as Browning himself remarked, I only make men and women speak.
Mm.
Unlike other poets, we seldom hear his voice directly. He didn't invent the form, but his perfection of it is perhaps Browning's chief contribution, I think, to English poetry. Each dramatic monologue is a single speech, usually directed to a silent listener, whose presence and response is clearly suggested and felt. We, the readers, are not just sort of sitting there. We become eavesdroppers, not passive listeners, but alert to what is being said, because the speakers are seldom what they appear at their first meeting. They talk too much, and the more they talk, the more they reveal about themselves. The characters of his monologues range over nearly 2 millennia from the time of Christ to his own Victorian age. So now to the core of my argument, I propose 7 reasons for Browning's endurance, and they're not exhaustive. 1, he's a poet of questions and ambiguities, not finalities. His poetry reminds us that life itself is messy and complex and not simplistic. It can't be reduced to simple things. Unlike today's self-appointed moral guardians in and out of politics, Enough said, Browning reminds us that life does not reduce to either or, black or white, but it's a messy infinitude of grays. In nearly none of his major work does Browning give us cut and dried, neatly tied up answers. He places weighty issues on his poetic and philosophical scales, tips them back and forth, and finally allows them to arrive at some kind of uneasy balance. Indeed, Browning can be said also to be a poet of unease, tension, conflict, paradox. He relieves us of the unsolvable untidiness of much of life. With Browning, there is as much to read in what is left unsaid as there is in the words and lines themselves. 2, he's a poet of morality. He reminds us repeatedly that morality is a relativistic and slippery slope. Moralists now and then who focus solely on such things as pelvic morality miss or choose to ignore far larger and more consequential moral issues, as we've seen in recent history. Now, as then, this is often done cynically and manipulatively, of course, as sometimes blindly. If you really believe in something, you're not open to reasoned response. An oft-repeated point in Browning is that true morality is love for one another in the broadest and finest sense of that overused word, selfless love, golden rule love, humankind, striving to emulate God's love, agape love in the Greek. And Browning knew Greek and Latin both, in addition to some Hebrew and several modern languages. Now, I want to get back to the Greek. In my studies of Greek, there are 5 words in the Greek language for love. We have 1. The Bible uses 3. The knowledge we have, for example, the 3 words that are used are philo, as in philosophia, the love of knowledge. Eros, as in love for one's spouse or partner, although some mystics use the eros verb for their relationship with God. And agape, generally used to express the love of God for humankind or the covenant love of the Jewish Bible. And just as important, that love of us for God and the love, empathy, and compassion we ideally should feel for our fellow human beings. It is the highest form of love, and he writes about all 3, but devotes his most closely reasoned writings to and excels at writing about agape love. His studies of evil are particularly sophisticated and multi-layered. Whether it's the cold-blooded Duke in My Last Duchess, or the murdering lover of Porphyria, or Guido Franceschini in The Ring and the Book, or the furiously envious monk in Soliloquy of the Spanish Cloister, Browning shows us time and time again that evil does not always announce itself with horns and cloven hoofs. Evil manifests itself in those who are in denial about their motives, their actions, and especially those who commit evil in the name of good. And it's even more subtle and clever when it operates beneath a veneer of class, position, respectability, wealth, power, or self-righteous piety. We'll get to my last duchess later, especially piety. Each of us is challenged by Browning to live our life on the highest moral, ethical, and spiritual plane. Third, he's a poet of the subjective, perhaps the most subjective of a century, I suggest. His dramatic monologues, for instance, speak volumes about human character in a handful of lines. He wrote about, as you know, action in character, rather than the simpler character in action. Fourth, a poet who challenges on the intellectual level. He challenges us with his poetics and erudition. On a deeper level, he challenges orthodoxy, received wisdom, moral blind spots, hypocrisy, doctrinal certainties, the arrogance and abuse of power. For example, Europe in the 19th century, as we know, was awash with revolutionary scientific discoveries, particularly from Charles Darwin. These discoveries atop an Enlightenment tradition of skepticism and reason, igniting a blazing controversy with the church and Protestant believers over biblical credibility. Since the Bible was read literally, believers felt that the very foundations of the world that they knew were being attacked. But Browning calls both sides to task in their absolutism on such diverse poems as Caliban upon Setebos and A Death in the Desert. Browning was able to honor both the sacred and the scientific, his faith intact. And I think there are a lot of us who do that today. He did not want the absolutist claims on either side of the debate to be dominant. And we're still doing that debate today in many circles. 5, a spiritual poet. Browning, in his own words, puts soul above intellect. One of the problems that contemporary critics have, and this is one of the things I took out of your talk, Laura, back then. One of the problems that contemporary critics have with Browning, especially back in the 80s when we were getting into all sorts of quirky analyses of poetry, is there a refusal or inability to accept his spirituality. These critics insist on dealing with him on purely intellectual terms, an approach that is doomed to failure. This was less of a problem in the 19th and early 20th century, which had little problem accepting Browning's spiritual core, because I don't think he can be otherwise engaged and understood. One may also dismiss the Bible on intellectual grounds because of historical anomalies and frequent lack of corroborating information from contemporary societies, but in so doing, one misses the greater spiritual and metaphysical truth, the metaphor of the book. 6, Browning was a poet of paradox. For example, in his poem Andrea del Sarto, a dramatic monologue, this technically faultless painter, utterly in control of his medium, brilliant technique, whose work we admire rather than respond to viscerally. His life was a mess. His marriage was a mess. He was always trying to seek favor with the Pope, and Browning lays all that out in Andrea del Sarto, the faultless poet, as opposed to Fra Lippo Lippi, a philandering monk, climbs up, Browning mentions it in the poem, climbs up to the second story to go in and meet women. And a philandering monk who paints inspired and inspiring works, religious works, using everyday people as his models, scandalizing the art world at the time. And I love the philandering monk. Look at the guilty eyes. I like to think of those as his guilty eyes. Lippi, I look at Lippi's works and I investigate the characters. I want to see each of them. I look at Del Sarto's work and I see an absolutely beautiful picture, and I don't really care about getting involved with the people. If that's a parallel with poetry, so be it. Browning, of course, was an elusive poet. And wait just one second. There we go. He's an elusive poet. He resists easy categorization. Put Browning in a box and label it, and you'll have to keep wrapping chains around it to keep it from bursting through. All of these elements, these 7 elements, combined in Browning's monumental work, The Ring and the Book. 21,116 lines based on a 17th century Italian murder case. It is one of, I think, literature's most exhaustive studies of human nature. And I confess I have not read all the way through it. So there. There's far more to explain than this about why Browning endures, but I want you to hear a bit of his work. I'm in the same way with James Joyce's Ulysses. I'm halfway through it. The book sits up on the shelf along with a guide next to it, and I just can't pick it up again. I'm sorry. All right. So in Browning's first long poem, Paracelsus, written when the poet was only 23, we see the journey of a soul. This great 16th century physician, reformer of medicine, and alchemist who took, as many people did back then, a Latin name, Paracelsus, meaning equal to the great first century Roman physician and encyclopedist Celsus. Now, I don't blame him for taking this name because his real name was Theophrastus Philippus Aureolus Bombastar. What? Imagine carrying that one to grammar school. As he did with many Germans of that area. I'm sorry. Browning was already wrestling at this tender age with the issues of love and power and knowledge and ambition. As we learned, Browning only begins with the historical figure and the history of the period. He expands upon and fictionalizes the historical data to help make his arguments. In this case, Paracelsus, like Prometheus, has aspired to save mankind. Knowledge, ambition, self-sufficiency, and arrogance characterize him. To know the intellectual sense is his highest aspiration. And in his pursuit and worship of knowledge, he has renounced all love for the sake of knowledge. In contrast in the poem, we meet Aprile, a young poet for whom love and beauty are all, and knowledge is secondary. Near the end of this poem, Paracelsus is gone, and he speaks to Aprile, and this is his epiphany. I learned my own deep error. Love's undoing taught me the worth of love in man's estate, and what proportion love should hold with power in his right constitution, love preceding power, and with much power, always much more love. In my own heart, love had not been made wise to trace love's faint beginning in mankind. To know even hate is but a mask of love's. To see good in evil and hope in ill success. Wow. Utterly different are, I just want to share these because I love them both, are his two brief poems, Meeting at Night and Parting at Morning. These are about 10 years after Paracelsus and are love poems of a sort. First, Meeting at Night, and the picture he paints, the gray sea and the long black land, and the yellow half moon, large and low, and the startled little waves that leap in fiery ringlets from their sleep as they gain the cove with pushing prow, quench its speed in slushy sand. Then a mile of warm, sea-scented beach, 3 fields to cross till a farm appears, a tap at the pane, the quick, sharp scratch and blue spurt of a lighted match, and a voice less loud through its joys and fears than the 2 hearts beating each to each. I think that is just magnificent. Then he leaves in the morning. Round the cape of a sudden came the sea, and the sun looked over the mountain's rim, and straight was a path of gold for him, and the need of a world of men for me. These have been subject to varying invitation, but Browning suggests that is the man who is doing the narrating in both cases. Browning is best known for his dramatic monologues, and his most famous, My Last Duchess, written when he was 28. And here's that good-looking dude again. In his most famous poem, My Last Duchess, written when he was 30, my error, he constructs a brilliant poem of great subtlety and suggestiveness. Although not based on any identifiable figure of the Italian Renaissance, It is one of the greatest poetic representations of that era, I suggest. The Duke is the speaker, a portrayal of evil, ruthlessness, and power, both enabled by and hidden under a title and privilege. He shows off the portrait of his former wife to a visitor, boasting that it was painted by the renowned Frau Pandolf. The visitor being addressed is there to negotiate the dowry of the visitor's employer, a wealthy nobleman who wants to marry his daughter off to the noble family of the Duke. She will be his next duchess. That's the background. And here are, I think, the chilling lines. Read underneath this, and we're almost at the end here. So he's showing the picture, and he says, she had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She'd light whate'er she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Search was all one, my favor at her breast, the dropping of daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush, at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one and say, just this or just that of you disgusts me. Here you miss or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, or plainly set her will toward yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then would be some stooping. And I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whene'er I passed her by, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew. I gave commands, and all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. Would you please rise? We'll meet the company below then. And I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence, is ample warrant that no just pretense of mine for dowry will be disallowed. Though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go down together, sir. Notice, though, Neptune, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity which House of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. What happened to the Duchess? She, and Browning thought this too, was make your own ending, but he had her locked up, just done with her. Some people like to think she was killed. I'm not sure that he would do that. That's not sadistic enough. In any event, it's said by many people that Browning's use of dramatis personae to speak to us precludes from ever hearing his voice, and that there is an emotional coolness about Browning. And now here, as we near the end, from Browning's final volume of poems, Asolando, a collection written in the twilight of his life. He was about 75 when he wrote this, and it speaks of Eros love. Oh, come on. Oh, bring back
right on the bottom, yeah, there you go.
Bring back, please, carousel slide projectors. Okay. And there we are with that wonderful picture again. And this, of course, we know who this is about. Out of your whole life, give but one moment. All of your life that has gone before, all to come after it, so you ignore. So you make perfect the present. Condense in a rapture of rage for perfection's endowment, thought and feeling and soul and sense merged in a moment which gives me at last you around me for once, you beneath me, above me. Sure that despite of time future, time past, this tick of our lifetimes one moment, you love me. How long may such suspension linger? Ah, sweet, the moment eternal, just that, and no more. When ecstasy's utmost, we clutch at the core, while cheeks burn, eyes open, arms open, eyes shut, and lips meet. I want to leave you with these thoughts about Browning. Back in 1912, the Browning Society's commemoration of Browning's centennial a Mr. C.T. Winchester, who spoke at that meeting, said, "The main purpose of poetry in Browning's thought was not to soothe, but to arouse, not to minister to our delight, but to enlarge and intensify our life." I ask, even though you already have, to allow Browning even more to enlarge and intensify your life, to be your companion in the way and to kindle your heart, that you identify the human virtues and failings of his characters and look for your own glorious humanity there, to seek out the truths Browning may impart to you and to remain open to what he may teach you, to allow Browning to inspire you never to compromise on the important issues of your life and those of the world in which we live, to embrace the changes that life forces on us and recognize them as an opportunity to enter an unknown but better future. Thank you. So obviously I love Browning. You all love Browning. And this man, you know, it's no secret. We could all spend the rest of our lives reading Browning and never really perhaps get all of it. I don't know. Any questions or comments?
I'd like to open it up for Robert Kramer. I know his eyebrow went up whenever you mentioned your love for Rilke.
Oh,
well, Rilke translated Mrs. Browning. That was
right. That's right. Yeah.
But I did have one little quibble. I think there are certain obscurities in Browning that are due to a certain way of writing he has. For example, it's often difficult to figure out who a certain pronoun or what a certain pronoun is referring to, just in the very way he's written. And then his use of the subjunctive that a lot of Americans today wouldn't understand, the subjunctive that looks like a past indicative tense, and it's really the subjunctive, and especially when it begins with the verb, "Were I present at that majestic moment." A lot of Americans, I think, are confused when you see that "were" there. They think of the past. So there are some little technical difficulties there too, that
Absolutely.
people who might even know all the scholarly references and classical references might have difficulty reading it. I mean, I have friends that have trouble reading Browning as a poet.
Yeah. And that's why I started by saying syntax is syntax.
Yeah.
Really be, whoa. Yes, good point.
I thought it was really, the whole talk was beautiful, thank you. When you were talking sort of about obscurity at the beginning and why now we find it so hard, I was also thinking back to obviously the funny comments from a lot of people about Sordello, right? Like, what is it even about? So I think you're right, definitely there's a distance now that makes it even worse, but even the educated reader for Browning, right, even in his own age. I think I read this really funny quote once that when he married Elizabeth Barrett Browning, one critic was like, "Great, at least they'll both understand each other." Because, and I think with Browning, I agree with you. I don't think it's like a deliberate thing. I think that there's just so many, he goes to ideas, you know, and because of that, there's no, like you said, there's no way to talk about ideas and how they manifest in the real world without there being this infinite complexity. And you know, so I think that there's something frustrating and beautiful about it. Like, I think I've spent 5 years reading Sordello. I have a book that's falling apart. I've read it, but do I understand all of it? No, it's literally falling apart, and I've written all over it. I see it as a work of art myself now, like this process over 5 years as I've been changing my mind and reading it. And it's just, yeah, there's still so much more in it to get. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then one other thing that I loved, when you were talking about metaphor, because I've been thinking recently, a recent project I'm working on is about the verse novel. And I think what you said really helped me to kind of think about why a verse novel, right? Why this strange combination? But I think it is like, if you're talking about prose as this literalism and metaphor is really like compressing it so you get to the essence of it, that verse novel is really like compressing the here and now in this way that you get those truths. And I'm just thinking about Browning, writing a verse novel, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and I don't know, you sparked a lot of thoughts for me, so thank you.
Oh, thank you. And Laura, I think there ought to be a special prize for you. You might be the only person here who has read all of Sordello.
Yeah, but I have not understood. I actually have published an article on it, which I am going to send to you afterwards if you have any interest in it, about history.
Oh, yes.
It was in a history journal. But yeah, and even then I know that is a fragment of everything that it is in it, but it took 5 years to read it, and I still no.
Well, I haven't gotten all the way through it, but now you're inspiring me. I might push myself. I'd rather do that than Ulysses. Okay.
Never made it all the way through Ulysses. I'm gonna just.
Thank you. All right, my friends. Well, I do hope you get to meet outdoors next month. I hope that all works out, James. And
Ulysses. Oh my God.
I didn't see that.
We're gonna read Ulysses next week.
Oh,
Special, like, beautiful.
Is that what it's about next week and next month?
Still haven't read it.
Ulysses? Oh God.
that's funny.
Well, it's funny because speaking of tackling Sordello, I have a copy of Sordello, a very old copy. But The Ring in the Book, there is one member who hopefully she's doing very well. She hasn't made it to any meetings in a long time. Evelyn Whitkin.
Yes.
You remember, Bob? She was the first person to, and you said it was 21,000 lines, right? So she was the first person, and this was in collaboration with the Browning Armstrong Library in Waco.
Mhm.
She recorded the voice. She read the entire
That's right.
thing in the book.
Oh,
So
Nice.
there's an archive.
God, I thought you were gonna say she memorized it.
At that point, I'm probably sure she was close to. But yeah, she recorded the entire Ring in the Book as a vocal recording for the Browning Armstrong Library. I think that'd be interesting to hear.
That's an amazing feat too.
It is.
Yeah.
Place I really want to visit that I haven't been to yet.
Have you not been to?
I know. I feel like it sounds like Browning heaven. I applied for 2 fellowships there and I didn't get them, so I'm going to keep going, and hopefully eventually they'll be like, "We'll let this poor woman in because she's keen." But I'll probably just have to go as a guest rather than a fellow, I think.
I've been as a guest, and it was immaculate. I mean, just the stained glass and the Italian portico. I mean, it's like literally Waco, Texas, and you step into Italy,
That's
and
right.
it's just this massive building, and every single stained glass is like, it's just a Browning. It's either a Browning poem or a part of the story, or I mean, it's immaculate.
I'm sorry, where is this? Where?
Baylor University.
Oh, Baylor.
Texas.
Oh,
Yes, the Armstrong Browning Library.
in Texas. Oh, wow.
Waco.
I didn't.
They have recreated the entire Florence living.
Oh my goodness.
Well,
I never knew that.
You can walk into Elizabeth's living room.
You can walk into Elizabeth's living room. That's correct.
That's amazing.
And it is, Mr. Armstrong was an oil millionaire, and he liked Browning, and he agreed to finance this entire building. God only
The
knows.
founder.
My next question, because I was going to ask, how did it? It seems quite random that.
Well,
would
we had the president of the London. Was it the president or the vice
Yes.
president of the London Society?
Yeah, the president, Spencer, or yeah.
And he wrote a whole a book on the life of Armstrong.
Yeah, I have it at home here. Yeah. Some of us bought it at the time. I read through it, and it was fascinating. And all the people who came through there, it became a center for in the 20s and 30s for people to come and speak. People who were poets and playwrights and things of this kind, and they would give lectures there to the community. And it was a real cultural center.
They still.
I think I may have misspoke. I think was Armstrong the professor who got the millionaire. He was a professor who got the millionaire. That's right.
Right.
That's right.
It's like
Well,
my next pilgrimage place then.
You have to go. And not only
Yes.
that, like once you get there, you'll know you got there. Like it's big, it's beautiful, it's grass, it's crazy.
Laura, the way I did it, I was doing a paper at the time, and I also knew the woman, the administrator, and I presented a proposal to go down and use their facilities to help work on this paper, which they said fine. So I spent a week there. But the only thing is, perhaps it still isn't, but it is a dry county. Just mentioning that.
Oh,
We get mail from you
So
know.
you can't have a glass of Prosecco while you're there.
This was the Merry Christmas card from Baylor University.
Yeah.
And it says Merry Christmas from your friends at the Armstrong Browning Library.
Wonderful.
Very, very cool people. And you know, it's just like a couple of old girls that just run the place, and it's nice. You go in there, you feel comfortable. They'll let you see anything you want. But you have to get
I'm gonna go if I ever get to Texas.
well, home of Dr. Pepper and David Koresh. You know, it's a nice the Browning Library. I would honestly, for me, I was just super impressed with the stained glass. The stained glass there is immaculate, and it's just all over the place. I mean, it's just massive stained glass, all Browning, all Browning. So, I have no idea.
Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry I have to leave, but it was just, I really enjoyed your lecture so much. I'm sorry.
Leslie, I don't know who you are. I'm
Well, I'm no one.
No.
that we've
been,
never met, and I'd like to meet.
I've been a member, my husband and I were members, but we were never really able to come to the meetings. And we joined through Tandy Cronin.
Mhm.
And no, actually it wasn't. We joined through
What's your face?
Steve Downey.
Steve
Steve
Downey.
Downey.
Mhm, mhm.
And is he's still a member, right?
Absolutely,
Steve Downey.
President Emeritus.
Oh, yeah. And we're members of the Players and other things. I'm on the council of EAG. You mentioned EAG, Episcopal Actors Guild, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I'm an actress and a singer, and that's who I am. But I have no, I love poetry, but very little knowledge of the, you know, the academic side. Very little, but I'm trying to learn more, so.
I was on council when Barney Hughes was president.
Pardon?
I was on council when Barney Hughes was.
Oh, were you? Oh, no, I came, well, it's been a long time now, but maybe around 2000, what is it now? It's, yeah, around 2007, 2006, 7, that's when joined and when our current administrative director, which the very year that she became that role, I joined Episcopal Actors. So we've been together all this time. Karen, if you know her, Karen Lee, yeah.
Well, thank you,
Well,
everybody.
thank you for asking.
I'm going to check out also, and I love the EAG, you know, if they're in my will, so.
Oh,
keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
So you're still a member. Great.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll mention that I met you.
All right.
But so to add, the reason this is so much easier to, you know, since I'm not home all the time, but just to come and do it this way, rather than taking most of the day to go. But when you go back, you'll be going back to regular meetings, right?
Well, so this is the plan. So May, I just sent a email to Fran Vallone, who is the director at the National Arts Club, and hopefully, I haven't heard back from her, but I alluded to the fact that we were looking for an outdoor meeting. So hypothetically, we might be meeting at Gramercy Park, or the alternative, which is just as good, is two blocks over at Stuyvesant. Stuyvesant Park.
Oh, yeah, I know
literally
them
two,
both.
2 avenues over.
Oh, that'd be nice. Yeah,
I
I'll
just
definitely
don't really-
come. Oh, I will make an effort to come
Yeah, I think it's
outside.
really, yeah, absolutely. I think it's gonna be an awesome opportunity for people to feel as comfortable as they want outside, socially distanced or not, or whatever,
Great.
however they come. But I think it'd be a great opportunity for us to finally get back together in the flesh for the May meeting. I also sent out the over 120 invitations to the high schools. So we'll hopefully have also maybe some of the poetry competition winners present.
Oh, yes, we remembered about that. I think that was the first year we joined, something about that. We were a little bit involved with that.
Absolutely. So I guess our co-host has dropped out, but I think we should give him a round of applause for Robert Griffiths.
It was great. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
It's good to see you.
Bye.
Oh,
Bye.
one thing.
And we are down to the remaining 6, the dirty 6. And Leslie makes this
Sorry.
5.
Bye.
So, Herb, what did you think of the lecture?
Brilliant. I mean, it touched on so many notes. It was like listening to Bach, you know, with the runs through things, and then, you know, another run kind of coming, you know, added like in a fugue. I mean, he's so familiar with so many aspects of the Browning world, and of the poetry in particular, and then how to make it simpler to access this knowledge of why Browning is special, really special.
I'm wearing my Browning t-shirt.
Hey, yes.
It's the rifle, but we'll take it. And Tom, what did you think?
It was enjoyable, and it's made some very good, solid points, and it's good to go over some ground that we may know most of what he was talking about, but it's good to hear it again and have it reiterated.
I really enjoyed the Sordello. I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't finished the book myself, but I have read, you know, I think at least a quarter or half of it. And to me, it's a little heady because you really have to kind of like do the research about like Italian Renaissance politics in the 11th century or whatever. And so there's a lot of legwork, but it's, you know, Ezra Pound called it the best poem in the English language for a reason.
I think there's a neglected aspect of Sordello, which I picked up on perhaps because I used to do some filmmaking once upon a time. And it's an extremely visual poem, to the point where parts of it read like a poetic version of a shooting script.
Yeah.
Which, may be meaningless to you at the moment, but if you go back and look at it, you'll spot that.
I thought it was interesting his take on Don Quixote as part of that.
Yeah.
I didn't make that connection before until he mentioned it. But that particular account of Sordello being the poet, like Browning transfers him from Provence to Spain, and I guess that's really the Don Quixote connection. I don't know, but I don't know.
Browning himself may have been feeling a bit like Don Quixote at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Robert, what did you think of the lecture?
I appreciated the general humanistic approach, really the human concern, the problems of being a human being. It was not scholarly or technical although I would be happy to see a little bit more precise focusing in on the philosophical questions. But I think this is what the kind of talk we need for a more general audience. I also like the fact that he expressed doubts about the theory that the narrator in My Last Duchess had his wife killed. Some people seem to think
he was saying
that's ridiculous to me, that guy would have had his wife killed and then brag about it to a new father-in-law's family.
But didn't he also suggest that he had her, you know, in the dungeon?
Oh yeah, but where he would have put her away would be to a convent. He wouldn't be to the executioner, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. That's
Anyway.
an interesting take. 'Cause typically people take that, you know, he had killed his last duchess, but I thought it was interesting that, you know, that would have been too easy or simple, you know.
Well, if I may add an historical note, the Prince of Rimini, Sigismondo Malatesta, who features big time in Pound's cantos,
Yeah.
throttled his wife at breakfast one morning. But be that as it may.
Was that in regards to the breakfast or?
I forget the details, but he decided that she had to go. But
Yeah, there's no doubt that that happened.
they had those people had that power. It's, you know, it's like.
But would you talk about it if you're trying to get a new wife?
Apparently, you know, those were arranged marriages. So, you know, if some duke or prince ordered his daughter to marry that guy because of some kind of a political alliance.
Marriage is all political,
yeah, you know, a young woman had very little choice in the matter. It's,
I doing a lot of reading of Carl Jung lately, and I'm surprised how harmonious he is with the ideas of Browning, and in terms of being able to mix good and evil, to be able to see it as part of humanity and part of yourself. And I mean, Jung talks about it in alchemical terms, or the unification of polar opposites, and the ability to contain all that within you. And that's what Browning does. He's a master Jungian mature person in literarily, you know, what he does.
Well, I think that's kind of an interesting subject, because for me, like personally, I remember like going to poetry readings or wherever, and somebody using the term like, that man was a monster. And the truth is no, that was a man. You know, so that separation where you take the humanity out of the actions to describe them as something else, I think you lose the humanity, where no, he wasn't a monster. He was just a regular man, and he was capable of these things.
That's one of the great things about Browning. He doesn't seem to have the self-righteousness that prevails in our society today.
No.
You know, that he sees the complexity of individuals like that.
And not only that, but he has a discourse. I mean, he's creating the discourse. He's having conversations, whether it's through the writing or through in his own head, but he's writing out the discourse like he's talking to these people. And I think that that's something that's lost in our current society, is that there's no willing place for people to understand why or how people act the way that they do. Instead, it's easier to write them off as some sort of malfunct or you know, monster or whatever. And I think that does I think that does injustice to what we're capable of in humanity. You know, not
I think it's another reason for saying that Robert Browning was exhibiting characteristics of modern ideas instead of 19th century ideas. That he could do a Carl Jung kind of perception and expression. So I see much more in Browning than I did at the very beginning. I mean, you're dazzled at first, and then you begin to see, how all the pieces are operating, and then the human behind it, as you put it. Yeah.
Are you talking about Gestalt, Herb?
Gestalt? No, Gestalt, okay, you see something in a moment, but I mean, Gestalt comes at the very end of the unification. I mean, then you're able to make one thing out of it. His notion of individuation is, I would equate to the Hebrew word shalom and the Arabic equivalent, salam, that it's a wholeness. And a wholeness that is connected to well-being. So Browning is saying, my giving you this monologue is going to help you develop more of those qualities of wholeness and well-being, of seeing things that way, and then feeling that, and then sharing that, and doing things that way. He's a model.
So that ties back into Jungian archetypes.
The archetypes are the different. Well, the characters that he creates may come out of archetypes. Probably do. There are heroes, and there are other kinds of cultural characters. That's part of the unconscious. But we have access to it, and when it's appropriate, we use these things. We transform them into the current culture's ways of expression. What images would be appropriate to go with that idea or process? Yeah.
How do you think? Just looking at the landscape of modern society. Do you think that the archetype has been somewhat shrouded as an attempt to hide the initial purpose or reason behind things? Like, do you think that maybe there's a clouding of the archetypes nowadays?
Well, distortion, maybe.
Distortion.
Yeah.
Because you see so much stuff and you just want to be like, I know that's an archetype. And they're like, no, that's
No.
the improper pronoun. That was my first thing was when Robert Kramer said it about the pronouns. I was thinking to myself how like everybody on social media now is like him, jim, jay, jou, ja.
Well, there's yeah. Well, for some reason, it reminds me just the in transgender culture, in some kinds of transgender and intersex, which means that there's a confusion of sex because you have some attributes from the hormones and different ones from the chromosomes, and so you have to find and create your own self. Out of all these pieces, and it has to be you and unique, and it's a stewardship, and so you would be checking out different archetypes to see what fits you.
Well, but I mean, in all reality, though, in reference to like the intersex or the Hiraj or the two spirits or whatever, I mean, medically, those things are very small. Like they don't really necessarily like the idea of someone being born with both actual sexual.
Yeah, well, that's one instance. That's only one instance. There's many ways it can come about. Yeah. Well, and then there's your own self image as well, which comes into it. And so if you take all those factors, they reported that there's like 5 million in America that have non-binary.
Diaspora, like what I mean, because
dysphoria.
dysphoria. So what you're saying, Herb, because
Yeah.
what I'm trying to understand is because before those elements were introduced,
Yeah,
people wouldn't even have an avenue to be able to discuss or think about those things.
that's right. That's,
That they're
yeah, some people,
created.
well, people might project these things onto other things and discuss them that way, like a playwright who I don't know if Oscar Wilde was in that situation or not, but you know, somebody of his stature, you know, might create a play which reflected this in its symbolism.
Well, one of the values of a classical education, such as it used to exist, is that you were made familiar with people like Tiresias, who switched back and forth from a man to a woman, and so on and so forth. I mean, this stuff is as old as the hills. If anything, it got lost in more modern forms of cultural discourse, and is being rediscovered now. But it's in classical literature, certainly.